Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Kate Cummins. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and 500-hour yoga therapist. I got training at Stanford University, and I did that recently because I've worked with all types of individuals in my private practice setting. I've worked with brain injury and student athletes, pro athletes, and I wanted to be able to bridge the gap between mental health and physical health. And so we are here today because we have wonderful humans in our community that would like to share their stories about how they've bridged the gap from being student athletes into the professional world and how they got there, how they moved from being someone that needed mental health services or just an understanding on what their mental health symptoms were into turning it into purpose and passion, which I think is a really beautiful thing in this life of ours, because finding alignment and a need for what you're going to be doing all day, every day in your professional setting is something that drives, especially athletes, into beautiful places in their future. So with that, I think we will go ahead and let everyone who's on the panel today speak to why they chose to be a part of this panel, what moved them from being a student athlete, some of their mental health challenges. I put that in air quotes because mental health is a part of our everyday existence. Sometimes symptoms get exacerbated and they're sort of at the forefront of our experience as a human, and sometimes they kind of go in the back seat and we're navigating things really successfully. So, but each of you has a beautiful story to tell on the whys and what drove you from being in the locker room to the boardroom. So I will let each of you take it away. Mina, do you want to start maybe?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you everyone for listening in and the panelists in this room. So my name is Mina. I am from Norway, currently in Puerto Rico, and I work for Athletes for Hope as the organization that I'm representing in this conversation. And so kind of going back 10 years, I was a track and field athlete competing for Team Norway, and then made my way to the United States, where I was a student athlete at the University of California, Berkeley. I took my bachelor's and master's degree, team captain, and it was going great, and almost made it to the national championship with
Is Mina Marie also?
Yeah, we can't hear you, Mina.
then COVID happened and a bonus. Hi, my Wi-Fi is chopping up.
Yeah, you kind of went in and out. So we heard the part about Norway, and then it moved over to COVID-19 happening. It was a little bit of stale air.
Okay, we love technology. Okay, I'm gonna continue from COVID-19, and the point is things started spiraling. And so from being on campus, which became a very unsafe place, not knowing your rights, also dealing with my own inner journey and not knowing the language of how to share or speak of what was going on. Also lack of knowledge of where to go in terms of if you do have issues with your coach. And so through that entire process, getting into slowly but surely the organizational space of mental health and sports, starting with Athlete Soul. It's a nonprofit offering transition or individualized transition coaching. And from there, I moved into Athletes for Hope, now working at the intersection of mental health, sports, and philanthropy. So that's a little bit about my background, and apologies for the Wi-Fi choppiness, and I will send it to Greg.
Great. Thank you everyone for joining, and so grateful to be here. I'm Greg Milnaric. I'm co-founder and CEO of Kumba. We're a preventative mental health care organization focused on working with athletes at the collegiate and high school level. Story for me and why I'm passionate about being here. Our founding team, all former student athletes at the Division III level. Unfortunately, for a couple of us, experienced the loss of our peers through suicide during our time in college on numerous occasions. And I think for us, coming out of school after our own experiences with therapy and it providing us so much, pointed us to leave our jobs working at other startups and really want to work on something we were more passionate about and hopefully have a really positive impact. We spent months driving around to college campuses and high schools all over the Northeast, talking to college counselors, coaches, athletes to understand kind of what would be most helpful to them and our own experiences. And pretty unanimously across the board learned that athletes want to talk to someone who looks like them, sounds like them, and fundamentally understands the athlete experience. So we've set out really to build kind of a mental health care organization around the athlete identity, connecting athletes, parents, coaches, and athletic organizations to holistic mental health care with sports psychologists, nutritionists, dietitians, and mental performance coaches. And yeah, really excited to participate and share more about my own story on this panel today. I will turn it over to Kelsey.
Hi, well, also thank you so much, y'all, for sharing. My name is Kelsey. I was a student athlete at NC State. I'm representing today Athlete Talk, which is a mental health and wellness app that provides education and resources for student athletes, and meets them where they are by fitting into their everyday. I also am a student at NC State and working to bring sports social work to NC State. And the reason I'm so passionate about this panel and wanted to get into mental health, I actually was studying social work while I was an athlete, but never planned to work with athletes. And then around my junior year of college, I had a lot of teammates who were really struggling with mental health issues because of the environment as well, post-COVID on our team and some different things and dynamics. And so I was doing a lot of advocating for my teammates in the mental health space of having better resources, having a safer environment. And then I unfortunately suffered a severe concussion that ended my athletic career. And so kind of both of those things, seeing the gaps in resources that we had while I was on the team and watching my friends struggle and feeling my own struggles while I was participating as an athlete, and then having a complete drop off of resources in general when I was no longer an athlete super abruptly, and realizing the difficulty of not only being within athletics, but also what happens afterwards and athlete transition, because I feel like once you are an athlete, that identity stays with you. And so I got really passionate about helping both athletes and former athletes to figure out their identity in sport so that that transition is a little bit smoother. And so I ended up going back to NC State to get my master's degree in social work, pursuing a performance consulting certification also, and just really got passionate about getting credentialed in mental health so that I can support student athletes both actively and in transition. Oh, sorry. I'll send it over to Lucia.
Hi, I'm Lucia. I'm here today representing the Kevin Love Fund. I'm also a former collegiate athlete. I played at University of California, Davis. I played from 2016 to 2018, but my career was supposed to be from 2016 to 2020. I left after my sophomore year after experiencing some intense anxiety and panic attacks that I hadn't experienced beforehand. I had to go to the hospital in the middle of the game. There were a lot of challenges that kind of came up for me that I had never gone through before. And going through that period, I realized that there was not much talk back in 2017, 2018 about mental health in general, but mental health, especially within athletics. Kevin Love's story actually was the one that I read and really helped me. So it's very full circle now to be working for his organization and really using the power of vulnerability that he modeled in our curriculum that we have. And I found that when I had left my sport unexpectedly, that by sharing my own story with my teammates and peers and just being very open and raw about it, they shared something back, and that they actually were struggling with similar things that I went through, but they just didn't have the safe space to talk about it. They didn't have language for it. Nobody was really having these conversations. And I found that to be very interesting and something that there needed to be more of. So I decided in that moment, I want this to be my career path. And there weren't really careers back then other than being a sports psychologist, which is extremely important, but there's only so many positions, available, and you have to go to school. And so I thought to myself, okay, I'll just start a nonprofit towards student athlete mental health. And luckily after college, I found a position with NAMI, working with high school athletes and their mental health here in San Diego. And through them, I found the Kevin Love Fund and quickly joined their team. I've been here for 2.5 years now, and we now have a student athlete curriculum that I'm leading, with the hopes of providing support and resources and creating conversations for coaches to hold with their teams, and to just normalize vulnerability within the locker room, within teams, and having these conversations on a regular basis. And I'll pass it to Maddie.
I'll finish it off. I'm Maddie. I'm representing the Sarah Scholes Foundation today. And my story and the reason I wanted to be here talking to you all is my good friend and teammate, when I was running at the University of Wisconsin, died by suicide. And just kind of having a very up close and personal experience with that, and being great friends with Sarah, I saw how easy it is for people to hide what they're going through or downplay what they're going through. And so Sarah's parents created the Sarah Scholes Foundation, and I've wanted to have an active role in that, as well as I now run for a professional team. And I've met a lot of people from a lot of different schools, who went to a lot of different colleges, and it's the same story. Every single team has struggles with mental health on their team, and it's really become apparent to me, like, this is not a unique situation, this is not a unique story, which is all the more reason that I find it really important to keep destigmatizing mental health however I can. So thank you all for being here today, and I'm excited to get into this discussion.
Thank you all for sharing your stories. I forgot to say that I'm actually on the medical board for the Hidden Opponent as well. So I forgot to say that in the intros. We are in such an incredible time period in our culture, because when I was in graduate school, there weren't these open conversations about destigmatizing mental health. And it was very much a medical model. You go get treatment for your diagnosis, and then it goes away. And so I think the neatest thing about hearing every single one of your stories is that we are in a different time in 2025, where all of us recognize that mental health is actually like your best friendship with yourself, your experience of your relational connection with your sport, with your athletic identity, with your teammates, with how you function in the world. And so we are in a really awesome, critical time where these movements and conversations are happening and the vulnerability is there, but we still have so many more bridges to cross, right? And so, what I say about high performing, highly successful, high achieving people, specifically in their behavioral adaptive coping strategies, which is being a really great athlete, is that they are the forgotten population in the mental health world, because the symptoms typically are internal. They're cognitively, they're emotional. You can shove them down and you can go run or go show up to your practice, or maybe say that you're sick for the day. So it's really tricky. And that's why I've always worked with high achieving, highly successful athletes and coaches as well, because it is such an isolated experience to be someone that is successful and have this facade that you need to hold while also kind of hiding the experiences that you're having. So, with the conversations of vulnerability and all of these like realities of what everyone goes through as a student athlete to transitioning out, we notice that it's actually a normalized experience. So with that, the next question was just the loss of athletic identity and how that impacted each of you, and then how you manage that, because that is like a massive grieving process. So Mina, if you want to start.
Yeah. I am in the midst of it. And for me, it's been hard. I choose to share in this position right now because it's been hard to find those people who share during the process and during in the midst of the journey, not after the fact. And so that's what I wish to just continue to try to be this voice in the midst. So on that note, it's been a couple of years now where it starts with, for me, was forceful. Transitioning out of sports when injuries would happen again and again and again. And what you're faced with at the beginning of an injury is, okay, I have this excessive amount of time now during a day. So how do I start unpacking that? But then it becomes weeks and months and years. And so for me, it's been these shedding of layers, starting with how do you navigate your time externally to how do I navigate my relationship with myself? And where do I actually now gain that feeling of achievement and confidence, which has been so soul dependent on my athletic performance and identity. So on that note, in regards to people who are in the midst of struggling right now, is I just want to say to continue to look for that help because no one has to go through this alone. And in 2025, there are so many resources and people. Dr. Kate, you represent the perfect, for me, intersection of inner work, be it yoga, and breath, and psychology and sports. And so finding those people that you have similar mindset, values, looking at their work, and just don't stop until you find that right support for you. Um, on that note, after Lucia's done drinking, I'll send it to you, Lucia.
Taught me. Yeah, this is interesting. We just had this conversation, the last panel too. Kelsey was a part of that conversation, but as I said, I left my sport kind of unexpectedly after my second year in college. I told the last group I was training up until the night before. I wasn't expecting to kind of leave and quit that next morning. But when I woke up, it was just like this inner knowing of this is it. I can't do it anymore. And so it was a really interesting thing for me because I knew I hadn't been feeling great mentally, emotionally, physically for so long, but I didn't have that in mind that like, oh, I'm not going back this fall and playing my sport. Or else I would have been training at the field the night before by myself. So it was really shocking, I think, to me to know, okay, I've made the call to my college coaches. That's it. What do I do now? It's the middle of summer. I'm with my parents at home. I still have to go back this fall. I have to face my team and tell them, and some of them I live with them, I'm not playing anymore and the reason why, or do I lie about it? There were so many things to navigate. And then also with all my old coaches, travel ball, and people that I trained with for so long that I knew I would be seeing when I was back home. Again, the same thing. Do I tell them the truth? Do I lie about it and say something else? Because I really did feel pretty ashamed that it was due to mental health. Like 7 years ago, you don't talk about mental health as being a reason why you leave your sport. It's either a physical injury or some other reason, but mental health is not on that list. So I felt very embarrassed and ashamed to even say that to people back then. Now I would have felt probably better about it, but even then it's still something very difficult for athletes to do when you've committed your whole life to playing this sport, and all the hours and help that people put into your journey for you to get to college and get a scholarship. So that transition was very interesting for me because I had to go through it during my collegiate career. So I was still living with my teammates and not being on the team anymore. So that was day after day. I sometimes had to take them to the bus, drop off for them to go to their away game. And I remember that first weekend when I had to take them, that was so hard for me. And then time and time again, when I would come across peers, other athletes asking, oh, like, how's season going? I have to tell them why I'm not playing. And I actually decided to tell the truth. Kevin sharing his story actually inspired me to do the same thing. And I found that it was really, beneficial and helpful. And it was kind of like a domino effect that a lot of people started sharing their own stories with me and confiding in me. And so I think that kind of helped the grieving process in terms of finding a purpose. Like Dr. Kate said, I knew, okay, this is something I want to go for in my career. And I just kept on that track. But in terms of the grief of not playing your sport, competitive sport, I still have experienced that, Mina. I stopped playing in 2018. It just barely got to like a year ago that I can speak about it without crying. Like, we talk about this all the time on Kevin Love Fund, and I share my story with strangers every single day during our trainings. And it took me so long that I think like in the last year or two, I've been able to talk very openly about it without getting emotional. But I didn't realize how hard that was for me until years later, when it would still come up for me in therapy, and I hadn't played in so many years. So I think it is a process. It's something I still miss. Like, I randomly miss our conditioning mornings in the weight room. And there's some things I really enjoy and that I miss about it. But I think finding purpose and passion in still being involved in sports and mental health, but on the other side of it, not as an athlete anymore, has been very helpful. And then knowing that I think once you're an athlete, you're always an athlete, just may not be in the competitive, state. So I started finding different sports that I could learn. There's also this joke and meme that every former collegiate athlete starts running half marathons, and that's when you know they're missing their sport. I've been training to run a half marathon. So it's just, I think you always find those things to kind of fill that void and that cup for you. But I think finding passion in this line of work has helped me a lot through that process. And I'll pass it to Greg.
Thank you. I totally agree with a lot of that too. I feel like I could pick it up there. I feel like personally for me, maybe similarly, yeah, I think an injury was the cause of like that moment in time where parts of your identity start to break down, which influences your mental health, and like other parts of your identity start to break down as well. And I think for me, yeah, at my senior year, I played soccer at Hamilton College, small Division III school, competes in the NESCAC, like high achieving academic and athletic. And I think when you're just so used to moving at 100 miles an hour all the time, to have really like the control or the agency removed from the situation with something like an injury gives rise to a lot of stress and a lot of fallout. So yeah, I tore my hamstring right before playoffs my senior year. I was the captain of the team. Vividly remember like crying in the training room, being so upset, just knowing what was coming my way. And I think particularly just as a guy, even back in like, this was like 2018, identifying as a male within the context of athletics, let alone just identifying as a male in general, just don't really have permission to describe those types of feelings, let alone like the language to kind of map to what you're actually feeling on the inside. And I think for me, like the most obvious place, I think particularly for like college age males to turn, is to like substance abuse and drinking. And that kind of filled a void to a certain extent that athletics did. But fast forward coming out of that, like the rest of my senior year, coming out of school, I think the other roles in my life, started to maybe break down a little bit more with the fallout of sports. And it took going to therapy for, yes, like the athletic side of things, but also for other parts of my life that, I called out wanting to work on, for me to understand that certainly it's like all of these problems are valid and a lot of other people are dealing with similar things, let alone athletes. But B, like, wow, the amount of empowered feeling that you get from like being able to talk about it and voice it is really powerful, and not something people necessarily call out or give permission to. So I think all to say, yeah, almost calling out the different roles that you show up in your life is really important in a lot of ways, or was important for me. In that, I don't know, I still kind of identify as an athlete. I'm super washed up now, but like it's a core part of my identity and always has been and always will be. And I think part of that realization along the way in therapy and, just talking to other people about their experience was really key to landing back in this work, in that, yeah, athletics has been a part of my life, my whole life. Like I've been playing soccer, I've been skiing my whole life, all of these things that make me who I am. And to be able to, I think, try to improve one piece of it based on my own experiences is just like a privilege. Like how cool is that to be able to wake up every day and focus on that? So yeah, I think succinctly, like the roles in which we show up in and like calling them out, giving permission to certain identities, certain spaces to talk about this sort of thing was really key for me. Maddie, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. I don't want to speak too much on this in the sense that I'm still competing. However, like when you're talking about being your identity being tied to sport, I just like I did 6 years of college athletics because I couldn't give it up. And then after college, I found myself at the decision of, okay, you can join this team and not get paid a salary and keep being a competitive athlete, or you can stop. And I chose to keep doing it. Like it's so tied to who I am because it is, when you're an athlete, like it's a lifestyle. It's you're basing your days around your sport and whatnot. So I don't want to speak too much to transitioning out of it because I can't yet, but I recently, a couple months ago, had a good conversation with one of my friends who and she allows me to speak on her behalf of this in these settings, but she graduated from my school. She was a runner and then quickly decided, okay, I'm going to run a marathon. And moved to a new city, ran the marathon, everything felt great in this new post college athlete world. And as soon as that marathon was over, that's when it suddenly hit her and she really struggled with, I don't know what I should do. I don't know what I want to do. I feel like I need to go run every day because I've been doing that for a decade plus. Um, and so I think it's just important to remember that it's normal. Everybody who is super tied to their sport will struggle with the transition out of it. I will struggle one day when I finally decide to stop doing this at a competitive level. So I think that's kind of what I really want to draw attention to is like you're not crazy for being attached to your sport because it is a huge part of who you've been for a chunk of your life. So that transition is and can be really difficult, and that's totally okay. Kelsey, did you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, because you had asked about just the identity shift, and I mentioned this in the last panel, but just as someone who had a very abrupt ending as well to the sport from a head injury, the identity piece was probably the biggest proponent because I had this injury and I wasn't able to do athletics anymore, but I had actually had multiple head injuries throughout my career. And so because I had multiple, sometimes it can be difficult to recover or just very unpredictable in recovery. And so a lot of the things that I even fell back on, and as an athlete, even if it's not sport, my identity was tied to spinning as many plates as possible, being a successful student, being a successful volunteer. I wanted to be a social worker, and the injury actually led to failing almost failing classes and not maybe continuing with school. So I wasn't this like great student anymore. I developed some cognitive symptoms and I really struggled with speaking and articulating my words, and I had a late onset stutter, and so I was stuttering and I had personality changes. And so even as a bubbly happy person, I was having these emotional outbursts at my family, and then I was forgetting anything I even said. And so my whole identity as an athlete, as a student, even in my community, it wasn't, because it's an invisible injury, it was really difficult for my softball program to understand. And so many of them had kind of stopped speaking to me once I left. And so I had lost my community, my identity. And so even all of these backup options to shift my energy into were gone. And that silence and just existing and being really kind of led me from feeling like a failure and a burden, and all these people had invested in me and my sport, and I didn't achieve anything that we were all kind of hoping I would, and I had invested in it, my parents had too, and really shifting from feeling like this failure to this resolution that I had sort of created during my recovery, which was to start describing people by their attitude, how they treat other people, and then their unique qualities. And so I wrote these things out on my phone and I started to practice describing people that way. And it really helped me to start to see myself that way too. So even if I didn't know how well I was going to recover, I didn't know what the rest of my academic journey looked like, but I knew I had a smile to give and kindness to give, and I could just really work on my character and being a great person. And so that really became the foundation for my identity as I worked through that every day, and seeing other people for beyond their sport or their job or their label and really healed the way that I built my identity outside of sport during that transition. So I just thank you for that question, and just really it healed me a lot to be able to shift that identity towards character. So back to you, Dr. Kate.
Yeah, thank you all so much for sharing. You know, just like mental health, right? Like the presentation can all look very different, but the core beliefs and the things that are happening are very similar when we look at like what's actually going on in the human experience. And so whether your sport was taken away from you overnight or on the field, or whether you knew you were going into retirement because of whatever situation, grief and loss looks very different for every single human being. And um, it's devastating. And the thing about grief and loss and something that you love and you were married to and partnered with, and it was, you know, you put your head down and you walked out the door and you just did the thing for years and years and years. And then all of a sudden you don't have it. That love doesn't come back. You can run the full marathon. You can get your doctorate. You can do a startup, right? But you're never going to replace it with the sport that you were married to and partnered with. And I think really understanding that and accepting that then helps you stop chasing the thing that you think you're chasing, and instead helps you get curious, right? And as human beings, if we are curious and open and able to change and evolve and expand, and still miss the thing that we are grieving and recognize that we will grieve it till the day we die, then it doesn't land as intensely and heavily. And the other little thing that I just wanted to speak to is jealousy, because my patients and I talk about this a lot. Jealousy lands with grief often, and it's a secondary emotion to the primary emotion of pain and suffering. And, you know, if you are someone that was a soccer player your whole life long, and then you watch soccer, or you can't even go to a game because you get jealous because you're hurting, it's also an indicator and an emotional sign that you were connected to something so deeply. And as human beings, it's actually really incredible that we get to connect, even if we miss it so very much on the opposite side. So just something to think about. And then Greg, I really wanted to circle back to men's mental health specifically, because I work with so many pro athletes and coaches, you know, and I just say that because they're like the guys you wouldn't think have a psychologist in their back pocket, or you hope they do. But so many of them didn't come to me until their wife or their assistant coach said, "You're going to get fired if you don't figure this out," or their wife says, you know, like, "I'm really, really worried about you." Right. So I would like to just give you some space, Greg, to share your experience on men's mental health specifically, and like what it's been like to really be vulnerable, and the power that you stated that's really kind of helped with this movement.
Yeah, definitely appreciate that. Good question. I don't know. I think it's inextricably tied to athletics in a lot of ways, because I think regardless of gender, like athletes share a similar issue, feeling allowed to talk about certain things that men do. Maybe similarly to some of the clients you mentioned, I feel very fortunate in that one of my siblings is a therapist and kind of like called it out early on to point me towards therapy, which has been super helpful. But I think athletics is honestly like a really interesting avenue towards bridging the gap to men's mental health, in that you can frame issues and frame topics in different lenses that are far more relatable. And I think like just one example that we see a lot in like the work that we do with athletes and with schools is framing things around performance, right? Like when you think about some of the stressors that give rise to larger issues in an athlete's life or in a male's life, like framing things about working on yourself through the lens of, you know, improving your performance or like showing up more effectively on the field or in the classroom can almost be like I don't want to say Trojan horse, but can be a little bit of a disguised way to having these types of more vulnerable conversations and better understanding what's going on in their life. So I think athletics can be really unique in terms of delivering that sort of message to a broader population of men of the male identity. And I think just like more broadly thinking about men's mental health in general, I think one thing that is really, it's like empathy 101, but I feel is like key to keep in mind is like everyone has something going on, like literally everyone has something going on in this call, whatever it might be. And literally just taking the leap to like speak about it, talk to other people about it, surround yourself with people who are willing to listen can go so far in kind of like building up that part of yourself that you might feel shame towards. So I think just literally calling out almost permission to talk about certain things can be super helpful. And yeah, again, thinking about what that looks like in athletics, like leadership and parents and people that almost set the standard of culture within an organization or within a team can have such an influence on how permission is delivered. And I think it's really important just to really like build that from the top, whether you're a parent, whether you're a coach, an athletic director, whatever it might be. Almost like giving male athletes in general the space to just say like, hey, like I don't need to know what you're working on, but if you need to work on yourself in some capacity, like totally allowed to do that, and that won't influence how my view of you as a human or as a male, certainly.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Do any of you want to also share alternative support systems or other support, just like Greg was sharing, like, beyond traditional therapy? What are other ways that you have found that has increased your mental health stability and safety? And if any of you want to share.
The first thing that came to mind, and then I'll send it to you, Lucia. The first thing that came to mind was at Berkeley, we actually had these alternative classes, and I think they're more and more, or increasing more and more on all campuses. But I was introduced to Sufism, which is an extension of Islam. And that was kind of the first class that I had at the intersection of more mindfulness and yoga, I would call it, but from a religious background. And that was the first time that in the midst of busy days, both on and off the track, that allowed me to step out of that athlete mindset of you're controlling the body and you're telling the body what to do, but to trust suddenly the body within the silence and to trust the breath in the moment. So an in progress project at the moment. Lucy.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I just wanted to add, I think therapy is obviously a great resource, but there's even like smaller steps you can take before you reach that step. So maybe it's just confiding in someone you trust. That could be a friend, that could be a teammate, that could be a coach, whoever that is for you that's in your circle. And even if it's not someone super close, but that you can trust them and you want to open up in that way to them, I think being able to share that you're even struggling in the first place, or you're having a little bit of a hard time, that does wonders for making you just feel less alone in what you're going through, and knowing someone else now knows as well, which is like so nice. You don't have to go through it alone in your room. So I think that even that small first step, I had luckily a teammate that was really, really good about sitting with me through all of my panic attacks and everything I was going through, and just sat there and listened. And that was incredibly helpful, even more so than like what I needed in that moment compared to therapy. So I think just finding someone, and that's, I think, where the work needs to be done with coaches as well and athletic staff, is making sure that coaches are able to open up and receive that from their players. And I think that's like another step that we're working towards in mental health right now in the athletic field. But even if it's a friend that doesn't play a sport, doesn't understand your sport, it's sport related, like just finding someone that you can confide in, that is like an ultimate, I think, really helpful first step. And if you can't find anybody, then writing it down on paper, that getting it out of your body is so helpful. I think everything we do is, as athletes, tends to be physical and active. And if we're not feeling great, we go for a run, or we go lift, or we go do that. But like Mina said, we never really sit down and breathe, or sit down and write what we're feeling, or even say it out loud. Like, we're never taught to do that. So kind of incorporating that into your routine, or just speaking out to somebody, I think that is very, very helpful.
Can I add something to that super quick? I would even say, like, the way that this panel is obviously from a trusted, like, evidence-based source, but even adding more mental health content into your routine, because athletes are so busy, but there's such great like books and podcasts and different things. And I think your input is your self-talk is your output also sometimes. And so the more athletes can even be sharing, I've learned that through Athlete Talk too, just sharing a podcast that was related to mental health or sharing content that's obviously trusted and healthy, but the more that people are listening to things or reading books or even adding it into small parts of their day, is a really good resource because there's so much out there from really great clinicians and different people with experiences.
Absolutely. The other thing that I wanted to just put a tiny little bullet point in on is that finding the right clinician is sometimes very challenging. And just because you find one doesn't mean that that is the perfect white glove that fits you perfectly. I've had so many patients that just didn't end up with the right fit initially. And so for anyone who is listening and is in that space and has maybe tried therapy and said like, oh, it wasn't for me, it's not for everyone. As a psychologist, I say that, but I also truly believe that when a human finds the right resource in a clinician and it is the right fit, really incredible evolutionary change can happen, and healing and growth can happen. And it can't happen if you don't feel safe or there's just a mismatch. So keep looking because there are plenty of providers. And if you don't know what you need, then like go to your college counseling center or call a resource. A friend of a friend of a friend's got to be a friend's cousins, brothers, uncles, got to be a therapist because there are a lot of them. So yeah, just something to think about. I wanted to ask all of you what advice you have for athletes who want to start out looking at, this idea of maybe they want to get more involved in the mental health space or community. Like, what are some things that they can do? And even if they don't want to go into like a career, I know, Lucia, you said a couple of days ago that there are careers in this space, but there aren't a ton, but I think we'll have more and more. So any ideas for people that are listening that would be interested in that?
I can start us off on that one. I think starting small can actually do a lot in terms of impact. If you don't want to go into this as your career, and let's say you're still in college, there are so many organizations, including Morgan's Message, Hidden Opponent, the Kevin Love Fund. We take volunteers and people sharing their story as well. There's so many ways you can get involved on your campus, whether that's within your own team, making a club on campus, or joining a club that's already on campus. It's just very valuable to have, I think, that within your own community. And if you don't already have one, that's a great place to start. Luckily, after I left my sport, the year after is when they actually incorporated a student athlete led mental health group on campus for student athletes and led by student athletes. And that's something that would have been really helpful for me. So I'm so glad they have that now, but we see that happening more and more, not only at the collegiate level, but we work with a lot of high school students at the Kevin Love Fund. And there are tons of students that are starting these clubs at their schools. Bring Change to Mind is another organization I'm thinking of. There's just so many ways that you could start this in your own community. And then if you're already graduated, not on a campus anymore, volunteering, the Kevin Love Fund always takes volunteers. If people want to share their personal stories as part of our curriculum, you can always, put on events in your community, go back to your team that you used to play for and maybe help them have these conversations. I think starting small when we have so many people doing it really makes a great change. It doesn't mean you have to go become a sports psychologist. You can start small, and you can even start as small as having these conversations within your families or within your own team and just start bringing that up, or one teammate. Breaking that stigma like one by one is going to have a great ripple effect. So I think there's so many ways that you can get involved at smaller levels that are just as impactful.
Yeah, I mean, definitely agreeing with starting small. I feel like the whole point of trying to destigmatize mental health is making it normal in your own life, and that's the first step to do that. Also, something else I'll note, if you feel comfortable, sharing your story is a can have a huge impact. And I know there's tons of mental health accounts on social media who welcome any athletes who want to share their story, and they'll post it like with a picture of you. Those come up all the time on my Instagram. But even a lot of like uh, news sites, newspapers, like they'll if you pitch stories to them, like there's a chance your story can get picked up. Like there are people who are listening to your mental health stuff. And I think if you're comfortable being vulnerable and sharing your story, like that is a way to make a big impact without having to, go into a career or anything, but just talking about it, being open with your friends, all of that. So yeah, definitely agree with everything Lucia was saying.
Feel like maybe, I don't know if this might be a little too philosophical, but I feel like related to that, I think the sooner if you're already thinking about mental health in sport, like chances are you're predisposed to having a pretty high emotional capacity, emotional intelligence, right? And I think in a current world that is feeling really crazy in so many different ways, I think the more comfort you have or the ability you have to lean into that side of yourself, I think will only pay dividends down the road and kind of whatever career path you choose to go into, be it in mental health and sport or otherwise. So I feel like advice to your younger self, but also like just a good way to prepare is just like, I don't know, lean into that part of yourself, surround yourself with people who may bring it out of you more than others. And yeah, kind of feel empowered by it. I think it's a cool skill that will only increase in importance in years to come.
Something else I do that's really small but has a bigger impact than I thought is I wear, um, and I do this in sport as I'm still competing, but you can do it anywhere. But I wear a green ribbon that represents mental health awareness on my uniform when I race. And it's past weekend, I was at the University of Washington running an indoor race, and I had two people come up to me and ask me, what's the green for? And then I can explain it. And I think people, take note, they're curious, and it's a way for, even though it was only two people, like to spread that message. And I also keep one on my a green ribbon pin on my backpack too, where I've had people in the airport ask me what the ribbon's for. So that's another just like super easy small way as well that anybody could do that.
Maddie, I love what you said about sharing. I love that, by the way. I'm definitely going to be doing that. So thank you for that suggestion. That's great. And I love what you said about sharing your story. I feel like moving from being an athlete to working in athlete mental health and getting curious about whether a career could look like, or even just getting involved somehow, would be sharing your story, and also learning, like you said, like some of those posts and attending different events, because there's always, or not always, but there's conversations happening and it's starting to grow, which is really amazing. And so even just finding sports psychologists or people that are in the space on LinkedIn or Instagram and seeing some of their content, and even just sending them a message if you like it. I feel like a lot of my opportunities to enter into the mental health space professionally within athletics have come from just sending someone an email or a message because I loved whatever they posted about it, or I loved their story when they shared it. And then that led to being introduced to somebody to enter into a professional space with it. So I love what you said about sharing your story, and then also just reading more stories and connecting with people when you see them.
I want to piggyback on that, Kelsey. I think the sports mental health world is very similar to the sports world in general. Like if you think about like when college coaches used to kind of switch from school to school, and as you're getting recruited, like everyone knows everybody. Like all of us here today, all of our organizations, we have worked together in one capacity or another. We're all going to be in person at another conference in just a few weeks. And there are people switching from organization to organization. So you just never know like when that connection is going to come up later. So I totally agree with reaching out to people on LinkedIn that are in that space. I've had people reach out to me saying that I work for the Kevin Love Fund and asking how they can get involved. And sometimes just volunteering starts and can really open up doors for you. You never know when people might need to come back to you and ask if there's a job opening that you may be interested in. Like just making those connections and networking, that's like a more tangible way if you're looking in the professional space. I think people don't realize how willing people are to help. So if I got a message on LinkedIn, for example, of someone asking like, hey, can I hop on the phone for 10 minutes and ask a few questions about your experience in your career, I would happily do that and try to give them advice. And I know I had so many people that did that for me when I was job hunting and trying to figure out my career path. So I really recommend people to use the resources we have, like LinkedIn right now, or even an Instagram DM, whatever it is, and just ask people if they would be willing to chat with you for a few minutes or answer a few questions, because more often than not, people will say yes. And then you don't know what connections they have and what doors will open for you. And I think that was kind of what we learned as athletes when we're trying to get recruited, but now like apply that into your professional career path as well.
And I won't say anything revolutionary right now, but just to echo what everyone has been saying, I also wanted to mention at UC Berkeley, we had a specific like mentor program. So looking on campus, if there are similar programs that are alumni from just the athletic program who are now in this network that you could lean on, because there is something finding those who have walked the path before you. And who you can trust, and kind of speaking to what Dr. Kate was saying in terms of finding that right practitioner, or even right mentor. Another one is if you want to work within this space of sports and mental health, and that's kind of what we're here is talking on this topic. Also finding other avenues, like other ally community clubs on campus, which might, for me, was the Boricua Club for Puerto Ricans. And then within that space, finding, okay, what's a mental health position within this club that I could help to advance in. And so not only thinking that it's these said organizations that you said see all over the place, but also finding your own avenues as well. And don't be afraid to reach out. Like Lucia was saying, that she's had personal messages. Like I think we all in this space right here would be happy to serve as just an ear to speak with, and to hold room for. So with that, I am gonna give it back to Dr. Kate, and I think we're about to wrap up.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I just put my web page and Instagram handle in the chat, and would love, link up with me, send me a DM, anyone at all, whether you're looking for the right clinician in your area, whether you want specific content covered, if you have a random question, if you need words of affirmation, I will send it your way. Every clinician who also works in the mental health field is also there for a reason too, right? And I think I think social media, although I didn't initially want to do it, and now I'm like in and I love it. It is such a great resource, and it's fun, it's interactive, and it's a space where we can all connect and sort of be an online community. So you would be surprised at like who wants to respond, LinkedIn, wherever it is. So be brave and send the DM. And if you don't hear back, it's just because you're going in like a folder that sometimes people don't find for like months at a time. My team always has to find them for me. I'm like, we missed it. So we only have a couple more minutes, but I wanted to see if any of you had some closing comments on just any takeaways about mental health, finding your identity, moving into the professional space. You did a remarkable job of covering it. It's so beautiful to see the passion, purpose, drive, right? Moving from this space that you dedicated your life to without really having a frontal cortex to know you were doing it. And then you did it. And then all of a sudden now you have your own executive functioning, judgment, planning, reasoning, and you're like, yeah, this is what I want to do. So it's challenging. Life is hard. There are identity shifts, and there's grief and loss. And then there's the next chapter, and the chapters that are out there are unidentified because you just haven't been there yet. So that's one of the most bravest things about going to sleep and waking up tomorrow and choosing to say yes to the day once again. So any closing comments from any of you?
I just wanted to say thank you. And then in terms of our conversation on identity, at the Kevin Love Fund, we're hosting a whole session on identity tomorrow as part of this week. So tune in at 12 p.m. Eastern. We're going to be doing our identity lesson. So you'll get to do a creative activity that goes along with it. So if you're just interested in that, I just wanted to plug that. But yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Kate, and everyone else that shared today. This was really helpful. I know if younger me in college had this conversation, knowing there were opportunities in mental health in the professional field, this would have been really helpful for me. So hopefully we could have helped a few other people as well.
And I thought that Dr. Kate, that was a kind of powerful statement at the end. But to add on, it's been so impactful to be in this, to work in this space of sports and mental health, and to meet the amount of people that I've met, inspiring people, and knowing that it might not be an easy day every day, but also working in this space is a part of also helping oneself on this journey. So thank you to everyone who's sitting on this panel and the work you're doing in this space.
Yeah, just thank you so much for hosting this panel. Thank you so much for everyone that was listening, even just listening to these conversations, being part of them. It moves us all forward. So I just love it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, echoing everybody else. Thanks you all for being here. Take every day, day by day. It's gonna be okay eventually, anything you may be going through. Yeah, but I think this whole student athlete week is it's really awesome that it exists, and I think it's making big impacts. So thank you to everybody who joined, especially. Like, we need the people showing up for it to work. So thank you all.
Thanks. Thank you.